Close your eyes and picture the American West. You see it, don't you? The lone gunslinger walking down an empty street, the sheriff with his badge gleaming, good versus evil, clear as daylight. Now open them, because that West never existed. What did exist was so much darker, so much more human, and so much more terrifying than any Hollywood film ever dared to show you. The West wasn't just a place, it was a machine that consumed everything in its path. Imagine arriving somewhere with nothing but a wagon and a prayer, no law, no protection, just you, the elements, and strangers who might kill you for a horse. Settlers weren't heroes chasing dreams, they were desperate people running from failed lives, broken promises, and eastern cities that had chewed them up and spit them out. And they weren't alone out there. Indigenous nations had lived on this land for thousands of years, but for the settlers, for the government, those lives didn't matter. Treaties were signed in ink that wasn't even dry before they were broken. Entire peoples were hunted, starved, and erased, all in the name of something called manifest destiny. Progress, they called it. Genocide, it was. The West was built on movement because nothing was allowed to stay. Towns appeared and vanished like mirages. Families were uprooted. Communities never had time to form trust before the next wave arrived, bringing violence with them. Everyone was running from something, toward something, but mostly they were just running. Here's what they don't tell you about the Wild West. It wasn't wild by accident. The government knew what was happening out there. They knew that entire territories existed without sheriffs, without courts, without any system of justice, and they let it happen. Because chaos was useful, it cleared the land faster than any army could. So what happened when someone committed murder in a town with no law? Vigilante justice, mobs, lynch mobs. A whispered accusation could become a hanging before sunset. There was no trial, no evidence, no second chance. Fear moved faster than truth ever could, and in that fear, innocent people died with ropes around their necks, swinging from trees while crowds watched. Even when lawmen finally arrived, they were barely better, underpaid, outnumbered, often corrupt. Some sheriffs were criminals themselves, hiding behind badges. The line between outlaw and authority wasn't just blurred, it was invisible. Justice in the West wasn't blind. It was bought, sold, and buried in unmarked graves. Forget everything you've seen in the movies. There were no dramatic countdowns at high noon, no honorable duels with rules and respect. Real gunfights in the West were sudden, brutal, and pathetic. Most killings happened in the dark, in alleys behind saloons, in cramped rooms where men were too drunk to aim straight. Someone would say the wrong thing, tempers would flare, and before anyone could think, shots would fire. Often, the victim never even drew his gun. The survivors, they weren't celebrated. They were feared, marked, because everyone knew that a man who'd killed once would probably kill again. And that romanticized image of the legendary gunslinger, that was invented later by newspapers desperate for sales and dime novels desperate for heroes. They turned messy, meaningless violence into myth. They turned killers into legends. But the blood was real, the bodies were real, and the fear that gripped those towns every single night was very, very real. If there's one thing that defined the West more than anything else, it was alcohol. Saloons weren't just bars, they were the heart of every frontier town. Information hubs, gambling dens, meeting halls, and places where inhibitions dissolved into violence. Men drank because they were lonely, because they were scared, because there was nothing else to do in a town where tomorrow might not come. And when you mix that much alcohol with that much desperation, people die. Arguments that should have ended with words ended with bullets. Friends became enemies. Strangers became corpses. And it happened over and over and over again, night after night, in every dusty town from Texas to Montana. There were no regulations, no limits, just endless liquor flowing into men who were already barely holding on, and the West drowned in it.
Let's talk about someone the history books conveniently forgot: the women of the West. They weren't damsels in distress waiting to be saved. They were survivors, business owners, outlaws, mothers raising children in places where a simple infection could kill. They ran boarding houses that kept entire towns functioning. They worked fields alongside men. Some became madams, others became entrepreneurs, and many picked up guns when they had to. But history didn't care. Their names were left out of records, their stories were simplified or sexualized or erased entirely, because the myth of the West needed rugged men, not resilient women. These women endured isolation that would break most people. They faced violence with no law to protect them. They made impossible choices in a world that offered them nothing but suffering. And they survived anyway. Their strength wasn't in legends. It was in the silent, brutal work of staying alive when everything wanted them dead. The railroad didn't just connect cities, it decided who lived and who died. One day you'd be a thriving town on a trade route. The next, the railroad would bypass you by 20 miles, and within months, you'd be a ghost town. Businesses collapsed, families starved, entire communities vanished because some executive in an office 1,000 miles away drew a line on a map. Railroad companies wielded more power than any sheriff or governor. They controlled land, labor, and the future itself. They exploited workers, many of them Chinese immigrants, who died by the thousands building tracks through mountains and deserts. Those deaths were never counted. Those names were never recorded. The railroad was progress, but progress always has a body count, and the West learned that lesson in blood and steel. Here's the truth about outlaws. Most of them didn't choose that life. The life chose them. Bank failures wiped out families. Corrupt land deals stole futures. Railroad monopolies crushed small businesses. When the system fails you, when there's no legal way to survive, crime stops being a choice and becomes necessity. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Belle Starr. These weren't evil people. They were products of a broken society, people pushed past their breaking point. Sure, some embraced the notoriety, some enjoyed the violence, but most lived short, paranoid lives, constantly running, constantly betrayed, never able to trust anyone. They didn't die famous, they died afraid, and their stories reveal more about America's failures than its triumphs. In the West, fame was a curse. The moment newspapers started writing about you, your life was over. Every lawman wanted to be the one who brought you down. Every young gun wanted to prove themselves by killing someone legendary. You couldn't settle down, couldn't trust anyone, couldn't sleep without wondering if tonight was the night someone put a bullet in your back for the bounty. Wild Bill Hickok, shot from behind while playing cards. Billy the Kid, ambushed in the dark. Jesse James, killed by a friend for reward money. The West created legends quickly, then it devoured them even faster. Fame didn't bring glory, it brought isolation, paranoia, and an early grave. Boom towns exploded overnight around gold strikes and cattle routes. Thousands of people flooded in, dreaming of fortune. But these places were never meant to last. Buildings were thrown together in days, no planning, no foundation, just temporary structures for temporary people chasing temporary wealth. And when the gold ran out or the cattle moved on, the people vanished just as quickly. What remained? Empty streets, abandoned buildings, graves without names. These weren't communities, they were collective delusions, places where violence thrived because nobody expected to stay long enough to face consequences. And when you don't expect to see tomorrow, morality becomes optional. In the West, death wasn't something that happened to other people. It was everywhere, always. Disease could wipe out half a town in weeks. Accidents were common and usually fatal. And violence, that was just another Tuesday. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no safety nets. If you got sick, you died. If you got injured, you probably died. If you made someone angry, you definitely died. Funerals were so frequent they barely paused daily life. Grief was constant. Children grew up watching parents bury siblings. Spouses buried each other. Friends buried friends. You learned not to get attached, because attachment meant pain, and pain was all the West had to offer. So people hardened. They had to, because the alternative was breaking completely. The frontier destroyed moral certainty. Was it wrong to steal if your children were starving? Was it wrong to kill if someone was trying to kill you? Was it wrong to betray someone if betrayal meant survival? There were no easy answers out there, no priests or philosophers to guide you, just impossible choices and consequences that came too fast. Traditional values, honor, honesty, compassion, those were luxuries for people with full stomachs and safe homes. In the West, survival came